Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers and sisters in Allah. Today we are going to discuss a topic that affects all of us, kindness. We all know that Islam places great emphasis on kindness and good behavior. The Prophet Muhammad taught us that kindness is not present in a thing unless it beautifies it, reported by Muslim. But if Islam encourages gentleness and generosity, it is because Islam embellishes it. It also teaches us the importance of wisdom and discernment in each of our actions. Sometimes excessive or misdirected kindness can lead to unintended consequences and even harm the person offering it. Imagine that out of a desire to be kind, we end up tolerating unfair behavior, or that our goodness is exploited by people who do not seek to improve themselves. In these cases, this kindness then becomes a burden, a trap that can ruin our inner tranquility and even our faith. Paradoxically, this quality, although so beautiful and encouraged by our religion, can be a source of suffering when we direct it towards the wrong people. Before starting this video, I invite you to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell to stay informed of our next publications on the Islamic faith. Thank you and good video. In this video, together we will explore 5 Islamic ways kindness to certain people can ruin our lives. We will see that Islam does not call us to be blindly good, but to use our reason and set limits. This path of wisdom is about knowing when to be kind and when, instead, to step back to preserve our own spiritual and emotional well-being. Prepare to discover valuable lessons to turn your kindness into strength, an enlightened act of faith, not a trap that pulls you away from your relationship with Allah. So stay with me till the end to find out. If you have any questions or comments along the way, feel free to leave them down below. I really appreciate your feedback. Let's go. Way 1. Kindness that encourages injustice. In Islam, benevolence is a virtue that must be cultivated with wisdom and prudence. However, this kindness, when applied indiscriminately, can become a harmful force. One of the most dangerous forms of excessive kindness is that which encourages injustice or unkind acts. This misplaced indulgence can lead us to tolerate or even support actions that go against Allah's principles, making us unwitting accomplices in injustice. It is important to remember that kindness does not mean accepting everything without discernment. For example, if we notice that someone around us is committing wrongdoing, such as dishonesty, deception, or injustice, our duty is not to remain silent out of kindness or fear of offending. Rather, our responsibility as believers is to warn and correct in a wise and respectful manner. By tolerating or supporting these actions under the guise of benevolence, we risk becoming accountable to Allah for facilitating behaviors that harm others or society. The Quran and Sunnah are clear on the attitude to adopt in the face of injustice. In Surat An-Nisa 435, Allah tells us, "O you who believe, be steadfast in righteousness and be truthful witnesses for Allah, even against yourselves, against your fathers and mothers, or near relatives." This verse reminds us that Islam calls us to be righteous, even if that means confronting loved ones. Justice takes precedence over all other considerations, including that of preserving relationships based on excessive indulgence. Being too lenient can also send the wrong message to those who commit the injustice, leading them to believe that their actions are acceptable or without consequences. By doing so, not only do we disrespect them as individuals, but we also risk encouraging them to continue in their mistakes. Our silence, or our blind kindness, then becomes a passive participation in their misdeeds, while Allah has ordered us to disapprove of injustice. The Prophet Muhammad said, "He who sees evil among you is the one who has done evil. Let him change it with his hand. If he cannot, let him change it with his tongue. And if he cannot, then let it be in his heart. And that is the weakest degree of faith," reported by Muslim. This hadith reminds us that inaction in the face of injustice, even through kindness, weakens our faith and our sense of responsibility. It is therefore essential to know how to set limits and adopt constructive kindness, which helps the person to correct themselves rather than persevere in error. For example, if a friend or family member acts unfairly toward others, our duty is to wisely make them understand the consequences of their actions. By offering him a kind critique, we help him to grow spiritually and to better understand the values of justice and integrity that Islam advocates. This approach may seem difficult, but it is necessary to avoid unintentionally contributing to blameworthy actions. In Islam, we learn that true kindness is wanting the best for another, even if that means telling them uncomfortable truths. By doing so, we not only protect our own faith, but we also offer the other person a chance to get closer to Allah by correcting their behavior. Let us remember that the ultimate goal of kindness in Islam is to lead others toward good, and not to facilitate injustice or turn a blind eye to acts that deviate from Islamic ethics. In short, being kind does not mean accepting or excusing everything. Rather, our faith calls us to embrace thoughtful kindness, a kindness that guides and corrects without hurting. It is through this attitude that we truly honor the notion of kindness in Islam, ensuring that our actions are always aligned with divine justice. Way 2, kindness that is spiritually and emotionally draining. Kindness is a noble quality, but like all virtues, it must be practiced with moderation and discernment. By giving too much of yourself, you can end up sacrificing your own spiritual and emotional health. In our desire to help others, we sometimes exceed our own limits, to the point of exhausting ourselves and compromising our relationship with Allah. This excessive kindness, although motivated by good intentions, ends up harming our well-being and sometimes our faith. Islam teaches us that taking care of ourselves is essential to being able to take care of others. When our spiritual energy is depleted, it becomes difficult to perform our prayers with concentration, practice dhikr, or even feel a sincere connection with Allah. Acts of worship that should nourish our soul then become obligations that we fulfill mechanically. This emotional and spiritual overload is a sign that it's time to set boundaries and reevaluate how we show kindness. The Prophet Muhammad showed us the importance of this balance. In a hadith, it is reported that he corrected one of his companions, Abdullah ibn Amr, who spent all his nights in prayer and fasted without interruption. The Prophet said to him, "Your body has a right over you, your eyes have a right over you, and your family has a right over you." Narrated by al-Bukhari and Muslim. This reminder from the Prophet emphasizes that even in our devotion and kindness, we must be attentive to our own needs and those of those around us. Setting boundaries does not mean being selfish, but preserve our well-being to be more present and effective in our acts of kindness. By respecting our own limits, we ensure that we do not fall into spiritual or emotional overwork. Imagine a well that is constantly drawn from without ever filling it. It will eventually dry out. Likewise, if we don't take the time to renew our spiritual energy, our kindness will end up empty and of no real value. To preserve balance, it is essential to alternate moments of generosity with periods of spiritual renewal. In the history of the pious ancestors, we find many examples of wisdom in matters of limitation. The great scholar Hassan al-Basri, known for his benevolence toward others, recommended that believers devote time to their own ibadah, worship, and meditation, even when engaged in charitable works. He explained that without this balance, the believer risks losing sight of his own spiritual journey, becoming more vulnerable to exhaustion and moral fatigue. So it is important to understand that we cannot save everyone, nor carry all the burdens. By setting boundaries, we allow ourselves to preserve our own energy for those times when our help will be truly valuable. Say no to certain requests where taking time for yourself is not a mark of selfishness, but an act of wisdom and foresight. By caring for our own faith and well-being, we can offer more sincere and lasting help to others. Finally, Islam encourages us to be kind, but also to preserve our inner balance. By establishing clear boundaries, we become able to practice kindness in more constructive ways, without risking depleting our faith or our emotional energy. The Prophet, who was the most benevolent being, knew how to set limits and remind his companions not to exaggerate in their actions, even those of kindness and devotion. May this teaching guide us in our way of giving, so that our kindness remains a source of blessing to ourselves and to those around us. Way 3, kindness that promotes toxic relationships. In our journey towards Allah, we are called to be kind and cultivate healthy relationships. However, some relationships can turn into burdens when they exploit our kindness without reciprocating it. These unbalanced bonds, often one-sided, end up weakening our energy and, worse yet, do not allow us to be kind. By distancing ourselves from our spiritual commitment, when a relationship relies solely on our constant support without any return, it becomes an emotional burden that hinders our personal and spiritual progress. Toxic relationships are characterized by imbalance. One party gives excessively without ever receiving support or respect in return. In Islam, support and kindness are virtues, but they must be exercised within a framework of equity. When a relationship becomes a trap from which the believer derives neither benefit nor encouragement for his faith, it loses its value. The Quran and Sunnah teach us that it is important to preserve ties that strengthen our faith and not ties that destabilize us or lead us to neglect our spiritual duties. The Prophet Muhammad said, "A man follows the religion of his friend, so let each of you consider whom he takes as a friend." Narrated by Abu Dawud. This hadith warns against the influence of our relationships and reminds us that the people around us play a determining role in our spiritual journey. When our friends or loved ones do not share our values or exploit our kindness, they can become a subtle but powerful obstacle on our path to Allah. These toxic relationships often end up creating an unhealthy attachment, emotionally chaining us to influences that do not respect our need for spirituality or inner peace. For example, if a person constantly asks for our kindness without ever encouraging us in our faith or reminding us of Allah, we risk deviating from our own path. Relationships that disrespect our time for worship, that criticize our values, or that constantly pull us toward worldly concerns are relationships that actually lead us astray from our spiritual path. Knowing how to identify and avoid these relationships is not a lack of kindness, but a form of wisdom. This allows us to protect our hearts and ensure that our friendships are based on mutual respect and spiritual support. Islam encourages relationships that strengthen faith. Allah tells us in Surah Al-Furqan 25 to 27 to 29, "The day when the unjust will bite both his hands and say, 'Alas for me. If only I had followed the path with the messenger, woe is me. Alas, if only I hadn't taken such a one as a friend.'" This verse is a powerful reminder of the importance of choosing relationships that lead us to righteousness, because evil relationships can lead us astray and cause regret. Authentic kindness consists of offering constructive support, encouraging goodness, and not to enable behaviors that exploit our kindness. By tolerating toxic relationships out of kindness, we risk getting trapped in a cycle of negativity that can erode our faith and serenity. Instead, it's better to prioritize connections with people who understand and share our values, who uplift us spiritually, and who are there for us as much as we are for them. In short, kindness must be practiced with discernment. Surrounding ourselves with people who respect our values and who encourage our journey towards Allah is an essential condition for preserving our spiritual balance. This does not mean that we reject every imperfect person, but let us be careful not to be imprisoned in relationships that weaken our faith. These toxic relationships often end up creating an unhealthy attachment, emotionally chaining us to influences that do not respect our need for spirituality or inner peace. For example, if someone constantly asks for our kindness without ever encouraging us in our faith or reminding us of Allah, we risk veering off our own path. Relationships that disrespect our time for worship, that criticize our values, or that constantly pull us toward worldly concerns are relationships that actually lead us astray from our spiritual path. Knowing how to identify and avoid these relationships is not a lack of kindness, but a form of wisdom. This allows us to protect our hearts and to ensure that our friendships are based on mutual respect and spiritual support. Islam encourages relationships that strengthen faith. Allah tells us in Surah Al-Furqan 25 to 27 to 29, "The day when the unjust will bite both his hands and say, 'Alas for me, if only I had followed the path with the messenger. Woe to me, alas, if only I had not taken such a one as a friend.'" This verse is a powerful reminder of the importance of choosing relationships that lead us to righteousness, because evil relationships can lead us astray and cause regret. Authentic kindness is about offering constructive support, encouraging goodness, not enabling behaviors that exploit our kindness. By tolerating toxic relationships out of kindness, we risk getting trapped in a cycle of negativity that can erode our faith and serenity. Instead, it's better to prioritize connections with people who understand and share our values, who uplift us spiritually, and who are there for us as much as we are for them. In short, kindness must be practiced with discernment. Surrounding ourselves with people who respect our values and who encourage our journey towards Allah is an essential condition for preserving our spiritual balance. This does not mean that we reject every imperfect person, but that we ensure that we are not imprisoned in relationships that weaken our faith.